Please record. Afternoon, everyone. I mentioned it before the whole panel got selected, but thank you again for your service. I know there's probably a few things you'd rather be than in this courtroom for the next couple of days, but we appreciate you taking time out of your schedules, away from your families, your other professional obligations to come here and discuss this case with us. As I mentioned in voir dire, I don't think this is a terribly complicated case, but it's an important case. And you heard Mr. Miller already talk about how much or what he anticipates the evidence to be in terms of what Ms. Spencer's been through. And I think it would be disingenuous to suggest that Mr. Scatena and Cafe 290 haven't been through the same ordeal. This has been on their radar too for the same amount of time. I asked a bunch of you during voir dire whether or not it would be acceptable or everyone felt comfortable with a corporation defending itself, and that's what we're doing. So the suggestion that the evidence is going to show that the defendants are entitled to defend themselves is a little off base. So let's talk about what this case is not about. I told you during voir dire, this case is not about sympathy. It's not about whether or not Ms. Spencer Smith went to all those medical doctors or went to all that treatment and she had those injections. That's not what this case is about. And this case is not about whether or not she fell. No one disputes the fact that she fell. Okay? What this case is about is whether or not Cafe 290 is responsible, was negligent in bringing about that fall. Cafe 290 is a small business that's been around up in Sandy Springs in Fulton County for about a decade and a half. Its main purpose, Mr. Scatena will tell you about it. He's a jazz fanatic. He gets a little too fired up about jazz. I'm not a big jazz fan, but he's a big fan. So they're open 7 days a week, have been for 25 years. They have nightly shows. As we go through the evidence, sorry, I told you I was a football fan. Always keep in the back of your mind the burden of proof. The plaintiff has the burden of proving their case in totality. The defendants don't have to prove anything. They don't have to disprove anything. It's the plaintiffs that carry the burden of proof. And we heard a lot about 5149. When Judge Besson reads you that jury instruction, you're not going to hear about 5149. You're going to hear about more likely than not. So what is this case about from the defendant's perspective? Emily, before I get into that, yes, Mr. Miller went through a bunch of our defenses. You know what I like to call that? I call that a straw man argument. He went ahead and just tried to preempt exactly what I was going to say because we've been doing this for about 2 years, and he's dead on. So our defenses in this case are I guess what this case is about, three things. The first threshold question is whether or not Cafe 290 was negligent at all. Again, before we can start talking about medical care and how much that costs and everything Ms. Spencer Smith went through, you have to first determine the threshold issue is whether or not Cafe 290 was negligent. And I would submit to you the overwhelming evidence before you in this trial is that they were not negligent. What do you have to determine in order to reach the conclusion of whether or not Cafe 290 was negligent? You have to first determine whether or not those stairs, which I'll show you some pictures of in a little bit, were even a hazard. And the evidence in this case, they're stairs. They don't move. They're static. They're not dynamic. It's not water on a floor. It's not a grape in a grocery store. It's not spilled yogurt in the produce section. It's a fixed object. So your first determination is whether or not a hazard existed, and the evidence is going to be that it did not. Even if we somehow get to the point of whether or not a hazard existed, the next determination is whether or not Cafe 290 had knowledge of the hazard. And I would submit to you that the evidence in this case is going to be that it didn't know about these stairs posing a hazard to its business invitees. And Mr. Miller alluded to it a little bit. Businesses in Georgia have a duty to provide a reasonably safe premises to the people they invite on to spend money and things of that nature. They're not an insurance company. They don't insure everyone that shows up. They just have to be reasonable. And Ms. Spencer Smith, too, she had to be reasonable. And so one of the issues you'll be asked to decide in this case is whether or not the actions, bless you, that Ms. Spencer Smith had or undertook that night on April 25th, 2015, whether or not she was negligent. And she can be, at the end of the case, we'll actually determine whether she was 10% negligent, 30% negligent, 60% negligent. That's up for you to decide what portion If we get that far, then Ms. Spencer Smith played in bringing about this outcome. And the